The demise of the Democrats. Turns out when you defend terrorists and whine about continuing the budget of the former Democrat administration, you don't have a winning message. We've got author T.S. Dixon and reporter Dan Lyman with us today. The news you need to know, but with solutions and hope. This is Get Free with. Well, it's a new low for an activist judge trying to block Trump's order to remove illegal alien gang member rapists and murderers from our country. We're going to be covering that shortly with my friend Dan Lyman of InfoWars and reporter with Border Hawk News. But first, it's loony leftist moves like defending gang members that might be responsible for the Dems' downward spiral. Even NBC and CNN have had to admit it's record lows for the Dems. Watch.
They are all, I have to say, Democrats, call your office. You know, we're March Madness times. Terrible, 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 to quote the great Charles Barkley. View Democratic Party favorably. CNN SRS, look at this, 29%. NBC News, you want to go lower than that? How about 27%? Both are record lows. The lowest going back to 1992 in CNN polling, the lowest going back on record to 1990 in NBC News polling. The majority of Americans hold an unfavorable or negative view of the Democratic Party at this point. All I can say is I'm a big fan of the oldies, so I'm going to quote Chubby Checker. How low can you go?
Nice. Well done. With that, what about congressional Democrats specifically?
Yeah, what about congressional Democrats specifically? You think these numbers are low? How about this one? Holy Toledo. Voters' views of the Democrats in Congress among all voters disapprove, 68%. And look at the approved number, just 21%, even lower than the Democratic Party at large. This is the lowest on record for Democrats, according to Quinnipiac University polling. You think these numbers are bad? Let's go to this side of the screen. We'll look how Democratic voters feel. Get this. The plurality of Democratic voters disapprove of Democrats in Congress at 49%, and just 40% approve.
So much to like about that clip, but I had to keep the holy Toledo in there. A little throwback to my old stomping grounds in Toledo, Ohio. Oh my goodness. It's watching something like that too. It shows how far we've come into the infotainment era where it's like, you got to really crank it up. No one's watching us. So just be wild and crazy out there. Hello, how can you go? Just very funny. Anyways, I digress. Much like the Democrats. But anyways, here's former White House Chief of Staff under President Trump, Reince Priebus, taking his take on the whole Democrat downfall.
Well, the Democrats have had two horrific weeks, and it really just comes down to what Donna said. They've got no leader. They've got no movement. The only thing they've got is Trump derangement syndrome. It's the only thing that brings them together. And the only thing they got out of this week was, well, who's going to primary Chuck Schumer? What are we all about? AOC and Bernie Sanders are the only people in their entire party that can get a crowd of over 20 to show up. So the only thing they are, I mean, they're afraid of Trump. Trump owns them. And it was a total slam dunk for the Republican Party.
Oh, no, they don't only have Trump derangement syndrome now to bind them. They have Elon Musk derangement syndrome. It's just a whole movement based on hate. And how can you expect to sustain a movement or a party that's just obsessed with hate? Hate. So, well, the Dems are at their low. It is the highest approval yet for MAGA. Watch.
First of all, the mood of the country. This really jumped out. We asked folks, is it on the right direction or the wrong direction? That 44% you say right direction, that's up since November. And if that doesn't seem like a lot, the last time it cracked 40%, you got to go back to 2012. The last time it actually hit 44 or higher, January of 2004. So a lot of this is Republicans, but independents, that number is also up since the election on the direction of the country.
So again, this party that has said we have to defend democracy, now they're attacking not only this administration, but the democracy, if you will. The majority of people are behind this administration, and they are trying to impede this administration from being able to do what the voters voted for. Now, in other news, President Trump has stripped Secret Service protection for Hunter and Ashley Biden, according to the Gateway pundit. Trump Truth, Hunter Biden has had Secret Service protection for an extended period of time, all paid by the United States taxpayer. There were as many as 18 people on this detail, which is ridiculous. Now, since this broke last night, there's been a lot of misinformation, if you will. I saw a lot of people being like, well, you didn't see Trump having his kids with protection and stuff. And it's like, come on, people. Like, can't you just maybe even Google for a second? Yes, Trump did have protection for his kids after he left office. But it also wasn't correct for the leftist loonies to be say, oh, but Biden, he extended for Trump's kids, right? No, that's not true either. He extended the protection for his kids on the way out. And I'm sure that this had to do with an increase in threats against he and his family. It was a 6 months extension. And let's not forget, his kids actually were involved and had roles in his administration other than just throwing his name around to money launder with foreign entities. So there's that. I mean, there's a lot of things here, but I just wanted to clear up because there's a lot of people saying outlandish things when it comes to this. There's also the whole issue that he's just out for an extended vacation, avoiding a deposition that he had scheduled for litigation he now no longer wants to pursue because of his financial problems. He says this while on a lavish 3-month vacation protected by taxpayer funded security. And let's not forget, it was Biden who denied protection for RFK Jr. Denied protection for RFK Jr. repeatedly, even when not one, but 2 of his family members were assassinated. But don't expect the opposition to have any logical arguments. Another reason the Dems might not be able to dig themselves out of this dip, we're going to hear from Woke Mind Virus author T.S. Dixon. But first, quick reminder to please support the show. Unfortunately, we have to do that not with big pharma dollars or George Soros. We have to do that through you supporting patriot companies that choose to sponsor with us. And so here's an idea. Get your investments into energy. Now that we have this new administration, consider making investments in oil. You can support our sponsor and support yourself. In the meantime, watch this. The world's smartest investors aren't buying oil stocks. They're collecting mailbox money from oil royalties instead. I'm talking about passive income that shows up month after month, starting with as little as $25. Visit ChristieOilBoom.com to discover how to tap into monthly royalty checks from America's most productive oil basin. You don't need to be wealthy. You just need a regular brokerage account. That's ChristieOilBoom.com to learn how you could start collecting oil royalty checks every month. Welcome back. We have covered the downward Democrat spiral. And so the obvious question is, why do they pick so many hills to die on? Issues that the majority of Americans cannot relate to. Democrats are now all in on death, fiercely defending abortion at any stage, dangerous and destructive inclusion of men in women's sports, pushing war, and now literally defending illegal alien gang terrorists. So what gives? Well, our next guest says it is, in fact, a sickness, a woke mind virus. And that's the title of his new book. Debut author T.S. Dixon is a seasoned researcher and executive with over 2 decades of experience analyzing political and cultural trends. So excited to have you here, T.S. Thank you so much.
Hey, Christy Lee, great to be here.
Yes, and I didn't mean to keep you waiting. I guess I just had too much to cover to kind of intro
problem.
on our topic of this downward spiral. And yes, that's the only answer, is that it is a sickness. But there's so much more to this that I know that you break down in your book, and that we can hopefully get a taste of in getting to talk to you about it. But I really liked in reading the reason behind why you wrote this book, that the motivating force was the birth of your son.
Yeah, my wife and I, we were seeing the country go down further and further every year, and the left just getting more and more extreme with their abuse of conservatives and their weaponization of government, the release of lab gain of function viruses and then vaccines to follow it up, and then turning the FBI, the Secret Service, the NSA, the CIA on the American people, and on a former president who was in the lead of an election. It just started to become more and more apparent that we were headed to a climax. We were headed to a breaking point in our country and in the West. And I needed to do something. I'd been researching and been an active conservative for more than 20 years. I was part of the Tea Party Patriot movement. I marched on DC, but I felt like I really needed to do more. And then when we got pregnant with our first son, that was it. I didn't care. I wasn't worried about any of the drawbacks or the dangers or the persecution. My wife and I agreed we needed to do whatever we had to.
Absolutely. And I mean that is the motivating force for so many of us with kids is like, man, if we don't start to figure out these root causes and root out the virus of our society, it's not going to be a good situation for our next generation. One thing that I found interesting about your book is really getting to the root of these labels. I will admit that I sometimes struggle, like when talking about this issue, should I say leftist? Should I say liberal? Should I say Democrat? I mean, the lines are blurred with these definitions, and liberal doesn't mean what it used to. So it gets confusing sometimes when you tackle these issues. Like you do need to understand what these labels mean and how they've evolved, right?
Absolutely, and the left and liberalism is so grotesque and un-American and un-Western, and at the core of their ideology is secular Darwinism and eugenics. Okay, even though publicly that's not their policy, more privately it is. And so their belief system is so grotesque and repulsive to the average voter, an American and Westerner. If they come out and tell you what they truly believe, they'll be completely politically rejected and never be in power again. And so they have had to do an amazing marketing job and brainwashing campaign, controlling education for 100 years, the media for 100 years, and the arts for 100 years, in order to lure the public into believing that they're harmless, they're loving, they're out for the little guy, they care about minorities, women, gays, transgenders, and whatnot, when they don't at all. Quite the opposite, actually. And so everything that they've told us have been lies. And then the actual true history about our history as conservatives and as free Westerners, and the true history about their origins, their founding fathers, their true beliefs have been completely whitewashed and hidden through the school system, the media, and the arts. And so, on doing all of this extensive research to put this puzzle together, I was just shocked at what I discovered and put it in the book. But yeah, they're a hateful group. They're anti-woman. They're very sexist. They're very racist. They're anti-Christian, not Jew, but Judaism, the religion of Judaism, because they hate God. They're secular Darwinists, and they're abusive and oppressive, even though they claim to save the little guy from the oppressor.
Yeah. How did they get away with like commandeering though, like the let's talk about the liberals, the liberal
Yeah,
movement. Like, I mean, I mentioned this before. I just watched like Enemy of State because since Gene Hackman passed away. But
yeah.
in that movie, the good guys that are against government surveillance and everything are liberals, but it's not that way anymore. Like not by a long shot. That's why it was kind of funny, is because
Yeah.
the liberals in that movie would be considered conservatives today. So how were they able to commandeer like the liberal movement?
This is a great question. Answer will, I think, surprise you. It surprised me. So Gene Hackman and Will Smith in that movie, who are called liberals, okay, you have to understand the manipulation of language. So
Mhm.
liberal was never a political movement. In the 1800s, there was leftism because we had first Darwin and then Nietzsche and then Karl Marx. And together they formed the theory of leftism, right, which was a response to constitutionalism from the 1700s. So the pendulum swung constitutionalism in the 1800s, swung over, and we got leftism. And now we have these modern conflict between these two groups. Now, there was leftism, but there was no liberalism yet. Liberal was just a word, right? It meant like if you wanted a lot of sugar in your cereal, you were a liberal with your sugar. If you spent a lot of
Mhm.
money or gave a lot of money away, you were liberal with your money. It was just a word. And they were trying to search for a label for a new political movement at the turn of the 1900s. A guy named Herbert Croly, a writer, went to
Mm.
D.C. He influenced FDR, and he wrote 2 books, The Promise of American Life and Progressive Democracy. And this guy was searching for a new label for their movement because what it really was, they took Marxism and Marxist theories as 10 planks, and they adapted it for Americans and Westerners. And they didn't know what to call this new adaptation of Marxism. So what they did was they stole the movement name from Teddy Roosevelt and called it progressivism, which was a Christian movement from the late 1800s. So we don't have time to get into that probably, but they stole progressivism and called their movement progressivism. This worked for about 20 years. After about 20 years, the public started getting sick of progressivism because they felt like, oh, we've already done so much in child labor and increase wages and give the workers a 40-hour work week and benefits. So they were sick of this. We've done all this work. We're sick of getting beat up by the government because we're not progressive enough. So they needed to switch to a new name. And so they decided to change it to liberal. And this was tested from the late 1920s. And then in 1932, FDR gives a speech at the Democrat National Committee where he officially uses the word liberalism as the new name for their ideological movement. And now, thus, since 1932, it's been liberalism. Now, all it is Karl Marx's theory adapted and contextualized for Americans. That's all liberalism is. It's a very evil and insidious communist-like plan or government style of governing and ideological belief system. And so they knew that they couldn't get the Americans to go for this. So they had to lie to people, and they had to lie to the Jews, the Christians, and the Catholics to get them to accept it. And they did that through charity. Oh, we're going to help the poor. We're going to help the underprivileged. And so if you support us, you're helping millions of people. I mean, this is a really great thing. Social justice is biblical. They called it the social gospel. But then as time moved on and the country got more secularized, they realized it wasn't enough to try and stranglehold the Catholics, Jews, and the Christians, the Protestants. They needed to get another group, which was growing and gigantic group, what you call moderates or independents. And so they had to get the moderates on board with them. And so that's when they created this new idea of a moderate liberal, right? Not a radical liberal, but a moderate liberal. And this idea, this sort of sales pitch, this marketing scheme was so effective that you can help out the little guy. You can be part of the in group, the cool guys. We're cool, and conservatives are nerds. They're losers. But if you want to be cool and be on the cutting edge, you be one of us. We're educated. We're savvy. We're cultural. We're artistic. And so on. And so that's how they roped in the moderates. And they had the moderates for 60, 70 years until the woke virus started to just catch on. And what happened was the real liberal establishment started coming out of the closet, so to speak. They started going, oh, maybe this is the time when we can really express who we truly are, how we want to murder babies and infants. We're murderous. We want to oppress people. We want to stomp on the conservatives, silence them, oppress them. And we want to bring in transgenderism and sexualize 5-year-olds and do all this insane lunatic stuff. But this is who they really are. They're social engineers and they're godless. And when they started to do that, what they did by embracing woke and embracing the illegal aliens was they started to out themselves and expose themselves to all the moderate liberals, so to speak, right? And we're told that moderate liberalism is classical liberalism, right? That's the original liberalism from Jefferson, but it's not true. Liberalism never went back to Jefferson. It went back to Herbert Crowley. He was the first forefather, along with John Dewey and John Maynard Keynes and FDR. They created it only 100 years ago.
And then I feel like today's definition of woke, I mean, is so crazy how it's become. But when I'm thinking about it, just sitting here, uh, I feel like it can really kind of be in this, and you can have a different perception, obviously, but I feel like it can be rooted back to just the struggle between absolutism and relativism. Like I feel like,
Yeah.
as Christians, there is an absolute truth. There's a right answer and wrong. And I just feel like right along with that, this virus kind of came in with the relativism crusade. Like, oh, what's right for you might not be right
Right
for
on.
me, and
Yeah.
and that's why woke was able to kind of grab on, is because you can't argue with something where there's no absolute truth because it's just like, well, it could be true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, is that off on where you were going with it?
Oh, no, you're right on. I mean, that's a bullseye. What I do in the book, because I like to really understand things down to the exact precise moment they started. And so I go to point of
Yeah.
origin for everything. And the point of origin for conservatism and constitutionalism is the Enlightenment and the awakening of the 1700s. And you have first a belief in God, deism, that there is a God that created us. And then the belief in truth, that there are true things and false things, right? And that's all laid out in the Declaration of Independence, where Thomas Jefferson, who's the father of conservatism, the creator of the Republican Party, even, he took all the ideas from John Locke and Rene Descartes and even some ideas from Isaac Newton and whatnot, and he combined them and forged these documents. He's the synthesizer. He pulled all the strings together. And so you get ideas like natural rights, like the proper role of a limited government, and capitalism. So these are the five core ideas of our people, of conservatives, of Westerners. But then it swings the other way. In the Dark Enlightenment, in the 1800s, you have Darwin, then Nietzsche, then Marx. And Nietzsche was the one that taught there is no such thing as truth. Truth does not exist. This was echoed by all the other woke fathers like Michel Foucault and the Frankfurt School guys, and like Marcuse and Horkheimer. And so these are the guys that create woke, which is critical theory, cultural Marxism in Germany in the 1920s, and then it grew from there. But they also believed in this Nietzschean concept that there's no truth. So Darwin gives the left a rationale that there's no God, right? And then Nietzsche gives them a rationale that there's no truth and no morality, no afterlife. All there is the pursuit of power. So if people don't understand one thing about the right, we must believe in a God because that's where our rights come from. And we must believe in truth, black and white. There's true things and false things. What is true and what is false, right? That is the nature of science to us. That is the nature of government. That's the nature of life. And it's the quest for truth. That was the Enlightenment, the quest for truth. But on the left, there is no God because true leftists are secular Darwinists. They don't believe in God. So therefore, there's no such thing as truth to them. And so that's the foundation, the cornerstone of their entire belief system. You're right on. I mean, that is how does a group that believes in truth and believes in rules and believes in law debate and argue and coexist with a group that doesn't believe in that at all? Anything goes.
Yeah, it would just end up circular. And you're able to cover so much in your book, Woke Mind Virus, that obviously we're not going to be able to get
Sure.
through even a fraction of it. But being that the book is called Woke Mind Virus, what are you identifying as the antidote? I mean, it seems that there is
Yeah.
this kind of new and excitement over logic. Like, wow, people are all of a sudden getting excited over like common sense and logic again. I mean, I feel that I see it being accepted more in social media and such. What's it going to take?
Yeah, so I lay out a framework. I use case studies in the book. I look at Elon and his reformation and reforms in Twitter over to X. I look at El Salvador with Bukele. I look at Argentina. I also look at Trump's first term. And then I show you, like, what's the pattern? What were the steps that these guys go through to do a successful reform in a country? And that's what we're in, this incredible period of reform. But the first step, the first thing people should realize is the truth is more powerful than the corruption and the indoctrination and the propaganda. And so that's why it's so important that we speak. And that's why I wrote this book, to educate and speak and enlighten people, because the truth is so powerful. And the first step is always rediscovering, where we rediscover who we are, what we're up against, what we need to do about it. The second step I lay out is to reclaim. I believe we're not in a revolution right now, we're in a reclamation. That means we're reclaiming the government that was ours in the first place. And people need to do that in all the European countries, the South American countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They need to reclaim their country. The conservatives do. The third step is reform, where you do all the policy work and the hard work that you're doing right now. That's the phase we're in now with Elon, with Doge, Trump, and the White House. And then the Congress hopefully will get on board with the reforms. And the fourth step is redress of grievances. This is the most important, where you need to investigate. When we uncover crime, we need to investigate that crime and prosecute these people and indict them. And they need to go to jail. people don't need a slap on the hand. They need a prison sentence if they've broken these laws and that they've committed all of these corrupt acts in the name of public service, right? We just the billions, the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being stolen and grifted from the American people, the corruption with the wars, the corruption with even the Biden crime family. I mean, this stuff all needs to be investigated.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where the frustration is lying right now because people are so ready for that step, that redress of grievances, and they're just not seeing a lot of action. They're seeing more waiting and more committees. Let's talk about it
Oh
some
yeah.
more. And people are like, no, we're done talking about it. Like, we want to see penalties. We want to see that redress of grievances. And so I think that this is a pivotal moment. Like, people are not going to stand for waiting for too much longer to see justice, true justice, um, prevail. The other danger in this that I want to get your opinion in is throughout history we have seen pendulum swings, and so we've seen, my
Yeah.
perception, we've seen this huge pendulum swing to this outrageous woke ideology way over here. And so, history would tell us that we are in the cusp of having a pendulum swing way the other way. With that, these extremes, do you think that there's any warnings or things we need to check ourselves on so that we don't just go from one extreme, if you will, way to another extreme?
Yes, because that is the natural course of society, to go from one extreme to the next, and anyone can see that pattern, right? And it's a huge danger. That's why we really need to support Trump. We need to support what Elon is doing. As anything we can do, this is the time to do it. This is not the time to get comfortable and relax that they've got it taken care of. If you're capable of doing something, now is the time to do it. Because if they fail, or God forbid, there's a mass assassination or something we haven't seen before, and they get back into power, it'll be far worse than it was under the Biden administration. It's not like they're going to temper themselves or back down. Now I think they're more like a cornered animal. And we're not just talking about the Democrats. I'm talking about the whole globalist structure of the international banking cartels, these international conglomerates and hedge funds. I mean, the amount of crime that's been committed is unprecedented. And so, therefore, if the faculties of government are properly used to administer justice, these people are in a huge danger, and they will respond. They have quite a lot of power. They control many systems, and if they have to, they will wage all manner of economic, who knows, different kinds of warfare against Western countries that are, throwing them off. Absolutely, I
Yeah,
think
I
it's a
mean,
huge danger.
yeah, and that's why, whether it's a Biden administration or a Trump administration, just constantly encouraging people to just start with their home and then their local, like, start
Yeah.
taking more ownership of what's directly around you, because then it won't necessarily matter who is in place. But as far as reading your book, like, obviously, that can be a first step. Is really the
Sure.
first step does need to be a deep understanding of how all this happened and where we're at in the scheme of things. But what else would you advise that we do, other than getting a great understanding of how this entered and how to prevent it in the future?
Well, I always advocate for educating your family, your kids, your spouse, your friends, your colleagues, if it's appropriate and whatnot. Getting, like you said, civically involved locally at the state level if you can. I think there's people out there that need to run for office. I think there's people out there that need to organize. We can organize with each other to form protest movements, to form political action committees. There's many steps that we can do to become politically active. There's groups, there are PACs and groups, there's media organizations that you can join with and work with to get the word out, to spread the truth, to support the movements that are happening now, to fundraise. There's all sorts of ways to get involved in the democratic process. So I would recommend to people to get curious, get some ideas, do some research, and see where you can get involved. And I would consider it like, you work 40 hours a week, you spend however much time with your family. What if you took, I don't know, 5, 10 hours a week and you did activism? And that's how I look at the book. This is my activism. This is my part to help, and I'll do more if I can. if the doors are open, but it's just what I thought of, what I could do to contribute and to join up with this effort and help our country and help the West. It's hopefully Elon and Trump will be very successful with their reform movement in America and will set a trend that then others, mid-sized and smaller countries will be able to follow to reform their own countries. And so I hope there's like a domino effect. But again, we're in a wrestling match with the left. They're not going away so easily. They're stunned right now. They're in a state of shock. They're trying to regroup, and their poll numbers, as you play, they're very unpopular. So they have to figure out how they're going to come back from that. They misplayed their hand. Their corruption and their crimes did not pay off. That did not work, and so now they're in a lot of danger. But that's what I would recommend. But please start with the book as well. What I wanted to do here is take what took me 20 years of a puzzle of research to put together and put it in a book. It's not fair because the social planners and social engineers have withheld this information from us that we should have gotten in grade school, and it was
Yeah.
never provided to us. And so I want to take all that information, put it in take what took 20 years for me and put it in a 9-hour read or listen and hand that and deliver that to somebody so that they could be fast tracked and get up to speed much faster. And knowledge is power. Understand the enemy, understand their opponent is a tremendous source of power. And if you look at Trump, he was politically active and knowledgeable for 50 years before his first term. He still didn't understand the deep state, didn't understand the globalist network. He didn't understand the Rhino Republican, the stay back networks, and it cost him. He was endlessly investigated. He was persecuted in office. They spied on his campaign. 2 impeachments. They stole an election from him. They brought him up on false charges, arrested him, and convicted him of several, like 30 some felonies. And then they tried to assassinate him twice, all because he didn't understand who he was up against and what they were willing to do. So he could just come in with the right approach from the beginning. And he paid a huge price for that education. Now he's tough. He prevailed and he overcame, and he's back in office. I mean, he's Superman, in my opinion. I think he's a champion. But think about what that could have saved him if he just understood who he was up against, what they were willing to do, what lengths they would go to. And so that's what I wanted to
Yeah.
take, even that 50 years that he needed, and compress it, put it in a book, and restore to the people what the social engineers withheld all these years.
Yeah.
That's
I
this
mean,
book.
at this point, I think we all understand the importance of getting ahead, because we did all have an awakening of our own of how far ahead they were in like gaming the system, and we had to catch up. And so now is not the time to get complacent just because the numbers are down, just because it looks like they're struggling. I mean, this is, like you said, the time they would be backed in a corner and can do some of the most wild of things. So I think that's really encouraging that you decided to set just a little bit of time aside to write this book, and it should encourage others, get in the game. Like, this is not the time to be complacent. You can start with reading T.S. Dixon's book to just get a greater understanding of how this all went down and how we can all work together to prevent anything like this from happening again, and to be on our toes about it. But I assume the best place to pick it up is Amazon.
Yeah, you can get the book on Amazon, or if you want the audiobook right now, that's available on my website, TS Dixon. And I just want to say one more thing for parents. If you're the parent of a teenager or a college student, get this book for them.
Yes.
My son is an infant, but if he was 13 years or older, I would put this book in his hand. I think every young person needs this to combat all the indoctrination they're receiving in their school.
Yes, absolutely. Right on board with you with that. Sounds like a great recommendation. Thank you so much, T.S. Dixon. Keep us updated, and we look forward to having you back again sometime soon.
Thanks, Christy Lee. Appreciate it.
You bet. All right. Up next, we're going to talk about these cases of due process, free speech suddenly becoming things that the left cares about. Like, since when? But only when it comes to gang members and terrorists, I guess, is when they care about free speech and due process. But we're going to get into that real soon with my friend. But first, a stark reminder to be prepared. As I said, no matter what happens, you need to make sure that you are prepared for anything, no matter who's in charge, no matter how complacent you may be feeling right now. Just make sure that you are prepared for any situation. I like to partner with companies that are obviously patriotic and free, but also are helping people to be independent. And so you can go to klbeef.com. Now they're expanding to other a basic meats line. So if you're stocked up on the beef, well, now you might want to come back and check out their new lines of chicken and ground beef as opposed to the fancy steaks. Watch this. Let them eat bugs, they say, or lab grown meat, or worse. No, we want our real beef. And we need to get free from the rising costs because the prices are skyrocketing. So you need to go to klbeef.com, stock up on all American beef from ranches in Texas, from Prepper All Naturals. We don't want the mystery meat. This meat is no mRNA jabs ever. It's freeze dried, stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers for maximum shelf life. We're talking 10 plus years without refrigeration. We're not talking jerky. We're talking about something you can just soak in water for 15 minutes, ready to eat. And these are premium cuts: New York strip, tenderloin, sirloin, chuck. Just use promo code KLB15 for 15% off your order. And like I said, there is now a limited supply on the premium cuts. So go to klbeef.com, check out the basics line, and get some other meat there stocked up. All right, an activist judge tried to order gang members back to the U.S., and Axios chose to put it this way. They said the White House ignored a court order to turn around 2 plane loads of alleged Venezuelan gang members because the flights were over international waters, and therefore the ruling didn't apply. To which the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, clapped back that the administration did not refuse to comply with the court order. The order had no lawful basis, was issued after terrorist TDA aliens had already been removed from U.S. territory, and that it didn't conflict. It says the Supreme Court has repeatedly made clear federal courts generally have no jurisdiction over the president's conduct of foreign affairs as authorities under the Alien Enemies Act and his core Article 2 powers to remove foreign alien terrorists from U.S. soil and repel a declared invasion, and goes on to say that, a single judge shouldn't be able to just take these activities that affect everyone. Well, Border Hawk News and fellow info warrior Dan Lyman has been on top of these wild developments, specializing in reports on the border and immigration and such. He joins us now to discuss. Thanks so much for hopping in here with me, Dan.
Great to be with you, Christy. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. So this story has been developing, and maybe you can get me caught up. What's the latest in this situation that you've uncovered?
Well, obviously, you mentioned kind of the basics of the story, but 238 Tren de Aragua members, along with 23 MS-13 gang members, were flown to El Salvador over the weekend on Saturday. And President Nayib Bukele broke the news and shared some pretty stunning video footage of them being deplaned and hustled onto transports and brought to CCOT, which is the supermax prison that they built just a couple of years ago to deal with such circumstances within their own country. And now the United States is paying them to hold some of the worst gang member, illegal aliens, and terrorists that have been caught in the U.S. Most of them in this case were from Venezuela, some were from El Salvador, and some from a handful of other countries in South America. And this was heralded by many immigration patriots and border watchdogs as a great move, a step in the right direction. But it's also created this incredible schism between those who are in favor of law enforcement and border security and those who would rather see these people stay in the country. So we've seen just an explosion over the weekend and contrasting opinions, those who say that this is totally illegal, totally unconstitutional, and those who say this is absolutely within the president's purview. And according to Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House, this is the apex of the president's powers to protect the nation from foreign invaders. And I would probably agree with Mr. Miller.
Yeah, I mean, and it's frustrating that opposition will be like, well, what about their due process? And these are the same people that did not care that, like, January 6th Americans were not given due process or a fair investigation. But I mean, I do think it is effective to bring up those questions, because obviously those are things that we care about, is due process and free speech, like in the case of the other activist that was here on a green card, and they were saying that he was being deported because he was organizing these protests. So there was some free speech questions there too. So these are the things that we care about. But I mean, ultimately, in both of these cases, the glaringly obvious distinction is the fact that these are not American citizens, legal American citizens that we're talking about in either of these cases, right?
Yeah, many would argue that due process does not necessarily apply to these people, especially if they're here illegally. And all indications are that most of them, if not all of them, were here in the US illegally. And the same people that are decrying this method and this process have had very little to say about the importation of millions of illegals into the country, many of whom are dangerous criminals, and so it really exposes them to show what they're enraged about. I went through some of the loudest voices yesterday, people from the Cato Institute and other pro open borders organizations, to see if they had said anything about 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungary, whose life was stolen after she was brutally sexually assaulted for multiple hours in Texas last year. And none of them, according to my search, had said anything about her at the time or since, because I didn't turn up any tweets from any of them with the name Nungary in them. So it's amazing to see them whining so loudly about the removal of dangerous criminals from this country. In this case, they are now operatives of a foreign terrorist organization. And they're so mad about that, but they're not mad about what happened to her or other victims of this gang, of which there are many now. This gang has proliferated specifically since 2022 under the Biden administration. And the Trump administration has declared that the Maduro regime in Venezuela is backing this invasion of the U.S. by TDA and has been supporting them materially and ordering them to come into the country. You know, I was actually just looking up last year. Actually, there was a directive put out from Venezuela giving TDA members the green light to fire upon police officers here in the US and also border agents. And so this seems like a coordinated military effort that's coming from another country. So I think that all of these actions have been properly clarified by the Trump administration, and I'm very pleased to see them taking action against this group.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to note that this group isn't just violent and dangerous and in a gang. I mean, I think it's important to talk about the I don't know if religious is the right word, but like the ties that they have to, like, these people in many cases worship Satan and have done, not just killed people but tortured people as like a religious practice, but obviously like to worship Satan. I mean, this is culturally what they're into. I mean, it's pretty wild when you dig down into it, right?
Yeah, many of these groups like MS-13, TDA, the cartels, if they aren't explicitly satanic, these are certainly demonic people that are in the country. And then they do horrible things in their own countries and throughout South and Central America and here in the US. And every time you see a TDA member get arrested, you see their crimes listed. And they're just horrible, horrible crimes. Crimes against children, crimes against the innocent, stalking, kidnapping, torture, terrorism. These are really, really bad hombres, and I'm very pleased to see action being taken against them. But it's going to be a long effort because they have infiltrated some of the most remote regions of the U.S. We've seen TDA members arrested in Montana, North Dakota, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in Maine, small towns in Wisconsin, and they've committed horrible crimes in these places. They're also running drugs. Typically, that's one of the ways they finance their operation. They're running weapons as well. And it's amazing to see how quickly they've spread throughout the country. And, I was speaking to a former ICE field office director, John Fabricatore from Denver area. And of course, Denver has become synonymous with TDA at this point with the stories
Yeah.
out of Aurora, Colorado. And, it's amazing to see them in places like rural parts of Montana. But what you realize is they've established hubs throughout the U.S., specifically in New York City, Chicago, Denver, and a couple of other major cities, also in Texas. But from there, they branch out into smaller towns. And so this isn't even a border state issue. It's not even a big city issue. It really is an all of America issue. And we're finding out that they're operating all over the place. These are very dangerous people. So this is going to be a long effort to root them out and hopefully send all of them to CCOT or back to Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to understand that there would be anyone that would, in any fashion, advocate for them not only to come here, but then to be kept here, or to once we're getting them out, to be ordered to bring them back. It's mind-boggling, really. But it does seem that they are uncovering some conflicts of interest as usual. It appears it's alleged that the judge that ordered the turnaround, his daughter works with illegal immigrants, as far as as an attorney in some assimilation fashion. So it's just there's conflicts of interest is bound, but like it's like they always find these conflicts of interest. Like how have they been able to operate this far without these things being uncovered, and how are these judges still in their seats when they should be recusing themselves, or these are obvious conflicts that you would think it wouldn't take something like this to have it revealed.
Well, of course, and it's we're shining sunlight in places where it hasn't been shined before. And the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, and the second, of course, has been very effective at dragging these people out of the shadows. No one would have heard of Judge Boasberg unless they were following January 6 cases or FISA cases, which he was also involved in. Apparently, very controversial decisions there. But now we're really having a national conversation about this guy and other activist judges. And just before we went live here, Brendan Gill out of Texas announced that he has filed articles of impeachment against this judge, and so that remains to be seen if that will be effective or not. But yeah, you kind of realize that this whole march through the institutions it really has taken place in the U.S. when you see that these judges are firmly embedded in the legal system, and of course they have close ties, as you mentioned, potentially with people in the nonprofit sector and in these NGOs, where they're kind of working together in many ways to continue the invasion of the US and then protect the people that are here, no matter how heinous the crimes that they've committed are.
Yeah. And I mean, so it is even more alarming and shocking to obviously when you uncover these conflicts of interests and allegations and things that like he should have very clearly recused himself for, especially advocating, which is get for something that, is a national security issue. It seems pretty obvious that we would be talking about impeachment. So to see that just, today you see a statement come out from the Supreme Court, Justice John Roberts, basically defaming Trump for calling on others to call for these impeachments. It's a real head scratcher as far as like why he would feel the need to come out and make a statement about not calling for impeachments obviously corrupt judges.
Yeah, and it gives some concern that if this case progresses all the way to SCOTUS, as it well could, what the ruling is going to look like. And it's an interesting moment. The administration has signaled that they're gonna be fighting these rulings and these decrees from these judges. Tom Homan says, "I don't care what they say. We're going to keep the flights going." Stephen Miller said that this judge has absolutely no legal basis to make this issue. It was initially an oral directive, which is what the administration is saying. The planes were already in the air. He issued an oral directive. It wasn't backed by a written decree. And so they were totally within boundaries to remove these people from the country. Although I believe there was a flight today, at least some of the people that were supposed to be loaded onto it were not, because the administration was following this ruling, at least temporarily. And so, it remains to be seen how this goes. But it would be great to see the courts overturn these rulings from these judges so that we can really see this kind of codified, see it really legitimize these efforts to remove these people. But the administration is going to have to look at its options, as I know they are, to how to get around this. I mean, how to use pathways where they're not necessarily violating these rulings, but they're continuing the work at hand. And I think they've indicated that they are definitely going to be trying to do that and looking at all avenues possible to continue removing dangerous people from this country and at the same time illegal aliens, period, whether they're dangerous or not.
Do you buy that we have the support for this effort? Like, I mean, particularly when it comes to the Mexico president, she seems like she's been playing along pretty well. Do you buy that we are going to have continued support for the effort to secure the borders?
Well, I do think that we had that support domestically. And I do think that Trump has the tools to force that to support internationally. If you looked at polling leading into the last election, you saw that the majority of Americans supported mass deportations, not just border security, but mass deportations, and nearly half of Democrats in that polling as well. And I thought that was very encouraging. And that really was a sea change from previous elections in the United States, where immigration wasn't such a pressing issue. Well, the Biden administration has forced it to become such a pressing issue by allowing 10 to 20, we don't really know the exact number, a million illegals into the country. As we mentioned, many of them very dangerous people, but most of them have just been dumped into the country through catch and release policies or have been welcomed in through the CHNV flight program or the now defunct CBP One app. Well over 1 million came in that way. We've had a variety of other programs, Uniting for Ukraine. I mean, just bringing in hundreds of thousands, millions of people, many of whom we don't know who they are, have been seeded throughout the country. And we see how that's affected places that we had never even heard of before, places like Springfield, Ohio, where they found themselves with an influx of 20,000 Haitians in a very short period of time. And we're seeing, as we previously mentioned, small towns in America that are being rocked by crimes committed by TDA gang members or just, let's say, lone wolf illegal alien criminals. One of the things that this administration has been really good about is publicizing the arrests of dangerous illegals on a daily basis. And we are seeing how many of them are child rapists, how many of them are murderers, how many of them have been protected by sanctuary jurisdictions over the years where they've been charged with heinous crimes, rapes, child sex assault, and then released back into the community, even if immigration and customs enforcement has lodged detainers against them. So we see the real dangers of these sanctuary cities. But we see that even the jurisdictions themselves don't necessarily, once they release these people out, the people in that jurisdiction aren't necessarily affected if these people leave and they go somewhere else, which is what we saw in the case of Laken Riley, where her alleged killer was released in New York City and he went on to travel to Georgia and commit this heinous crime, according to authorities. So every town is a border town right now. Every town has been affected by the Biden border invasion. And of course, the millions of illegals were here long before Biden ever took office. So this is a huge, huge issue. And the administration has their hands full, even mitigating, the tip of the iceberg right now, especially with the headwinds from activist judges like Judge Boasberg.
And so, I mean, they're doing, I mean, in light of everything, a phenomenal job of cleaning up. I mean, there's been a couple networks that have gone to the border looking for coverage of illegals coming, and they literally can't find anyone. I know Texas has had to close down some holding centers, even because they've done such a great job at cleaning that up. But we still have the effects from before. Particularly what always comes to mind for me is the amount of the hundreds of thousands of missing children under the Biden administration. I haven't heard much about how they intend to follow up on that, locate the children. Do you have some intel as far as that goes?
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of talk about that. I did see a report not too long ago saying they had located something like 80,000 of them, but I don't know to what extent that let's say if those children needed rescuing or relocation. But the bottom line is most of those kids aren't supposed to be in the country either. It's terrible what has happened to them. But are we supposed to be on the hook for taking care of, 500,000 foreign children for the rest of their lives? Are they going to be allowed to stay, or are they going to be peacefully repatriated and sent back to their families, back in their home countries? I don't know, but I do hope that they are found first and located, identified, and people can, in the high levels of power can figure out exactly what to do with them. But that's definitely a concern as well. And that really is one of the worst aspects of the Biden border invasion is that they essentially oversaw the largest child trafficking operation in the history of the world. And that really is a stain on the reputation of this country and all that live here. And of course, many of the loudest voices that are so mad about the removal of a couple hundred known gang members had very little to say about that, if anything at all, which really, again, indicates where their priorities lie.
Well, and to that end, there was a network article, I believe it was NBC, that was highlighting the story of a child that was getting like cancer treatments, I believe here, and how that her and her family were being deported. And so they're highlighting, a sad story about like, oh, she may need to find a different treatment plan now that she can't stay on her U.S. Treatment plan, but. So they'll highlight one story, one child, a sad story about a child there. But I mean, my first thought is like, well, what about the literally hundreds of thousands of their children we don't know have been killed or could be being passed around in child sex trafficking? It's like the priorities are so clearly you can identify as propaganda because you're like telling a sad story about one kid, but you didn't care about all of these other kids that are in much worse situations. And at the end of the day, we should be sad and mad at the parents that put their children in these types of situations. They cut in line. They didn't do it the legal way. They cut in line and then they took that risk when they did that. And there's families that are coming here illegally that have to wait longer because they didn't cut in line, if you will. So it's very frustrating. But I'm glad that we have alternative news organizations like yourself that are seeking the truth. Where can we find more information as you follow this story?
We're always posting exclusive content at borderhawk.news or on Twitter at borderhawknews. And we've been at the White House all week, coverage in the White House press pool, and we'll be there for the coming days.
Excellent.
And as you mentioned, the border's a lot quieter than it used to be. We've done a ton of work at the border, and right now we're focusing on interior enforcement because that is the issue of the time.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dan. I just ran out of time, but appreciate you, and I'm sure we'll be checking in with you again soon.
Thank you, Christy.
You bet. All right, please support the show. Go to mypillow.com /KL, or you can just go to mypillow.com and use promo code KL, just 2 letters, KL. Pick up on all your favorites, get yourself some good stuff. Please do it now. Could really use some support for the show, and you get some cool stuff out of it as well. So it's a win-win situation. Promo code KL at mypillow.com. So many different things to choose from. All great stuff. All right, here's the scripture of the day real quick. And I chose Psalm 23:3. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. We all need some soul restoration. Turn to the word of God. Well, thanks for watching. And remember to get free with Christy Lee.